Well, congratulations to everyone who is still here. That's a long day that we've all had, I think. So it's been, I think Zach and I were just talking about how we can meaningfully use these last 10 or 12 minutes. And in part, I suppose it is, we do have a few slides that we'll run through, but also just in reflecting on everything that's been covered today, when we think about what are the future challenges for this field, I think we really have touched on quite a few of them over the course of the day, that we are at a certain point. PTSD first came into DSM back in 1980, so we're almost 40 years since then, and certainly there's been a lot of progress over that time, but we're really at a point now, I think, where we're saying there are serious limitations in what we know, and there's a whole lot more that we still need to learn. So in no way can we feel complacent about where we're at the moment. So I think what we decided to do was that I was going to start talking to the slides, and then Zach is going to jump in as well. So we often talk about the rule of thirds, and that is that we know that with our current evidence-based treatments, a third of people do very well, and we could safely say no longer had a diagnosis. There's a second third who gain significant benefit but are still symptomatic. And then there's a third who our current treatments don't actually do much for at all. That's a huge number of people when we look at that, and clearly that's not good enough, and as I say, we can no way be complacent about that. When we look at veterans and emergency service personnel, that may be even a little bit worse than that number, where we've got that cumulative trauma. And one of the key challenges is that as a field, we've got treatment guidelines that says what our first line treatments are, but we don't have a clear algorithm or a clear guide for people. What do I do then? If that first line treatment isn't working, what's my next step? And that's something that, and the other point just that Kim made before around, we don't yet know what treatment is best for what person at what point in time. So that personalised approach to treatment is something that we're still, we've got a long way to go. Research is being done in that, but we've still got a long way to go. Importantly, and as we've spoken about over today, we're not just looking at a simple version of PTSD, if there is such a thing, but we're looking at complexity, we're looking at associated problems, we're looking at other things such as moral injury, and research is needed in all of those areas to better understand the best way to help people. I'm going to ask Zach to jump in.
You're doing a great job. Keep going.
Oh, okay.
It's going to be the easiest session for me.
The first challenge is really getting people into evidence-based treatments. So we know that the uptake of evidence-based treatments amongst clinicians is not very good. Even people who are trained in providing treatments don't routinely provide them, and we often hear people say, we don't think the client's ready. I've had a number of referrals personally, I'm sure this happens to other people as well, where people come to me to say, my psychologist said that I wasn't ready for trauma-focused therapy, but I think I am and I really want to do it. And they are. So there just seems to be this reluctance on the part of service providers, let alone the natural avoidance on the part of individuals to get into that evidence-based treatment. I'm just going to wait for you to jump in, Zach.
Yes. I suppose just it is shocking when you think of it, and I accept that people struggle responding, and sometimes the treatments aren't long enough to get. Okay. Yeah. I accept that sometimes some of the structured programs don't get through the whole trauma content and load. But so many people who are injured just never even get the opportunity to get these evidence-based treatments. And they might not go fantastically well. We've had people go through our programs once with no response, get some additional treatment, come back in 2 years' time, and then get a fantastic response. So even if the first one doesn't fully shut it down, so these are the best treatments we know that can reduce the intensity of those PTSD symptoms. And if you can dial them down a little bit, you can often release a lot more capacity to then get back and re-engage with life. So it's just remarkable how many people are injured and are constantly engaged with the mental health care system, and yet when you do a clinical review, they've never been provided the opportunity to get the one treatment that the evidence says would help. So that really is a scandal in this country, and it continues to be so.
Yeah, absolutely. Another key challenge is really when we're talking about emergency service organisations, veterans, coming from a culture where self-reliance is really valued. And so there can be just that barrier of people actually being prepared to put up their hand to say that they do need help. And that can be a significant barrier in itself, as well as obviously issues around stigma. We've come a long way in increasing awareness of mental health. Organisations have come a long way in promoting mental health, but it's still an issue, and there are still career implications for people if they put up their hand. And so we need to recognise that some of these things are still getting in the way.
I don't want to do a Trump-Hillary moment of hovering in the background, which I feel like I'm doing.
You do that
but I would also think it's really important for organisations. Now, most organisations have this sense of their own benign integrity, but for employees, they don't experience it that way. And organisations have to separate the fitness and the welfare arms. There is an inherent conflict of interest, and if those two arms aren't separated, then the capacity for injured workers to put their hand up is just compromised and undermined. So I don't care how benign you as an organisation think you are, if you do not separate your fitness assessment from your welfare arm, and if there's any kind of failure to have that completely ward off, then people will not get early help. Now, we've got treatments, but there's all these kinds of innovations that are happening that are trying to see if we can get better outcomes. One of the oddest findings, which is now established in the field, is if you do this kind of prolonged exposure therapy and then you play Tetris after it, you get a better outcome than you don't. Now, I didn't really think Tetris was such a great game, and yet there's something about it's actually the neurocircuitry and how it engages that works out. There are some other, propranolol and MDMA are two sort of interventions that have some promise. There's also suggestions that some preloading with cortisol might help. So there's a lot of innovation trying to get better outcomes by combining the best frontline treatments with other treatments. So we'll just have to see about that, whether we can get better outcomes.
Okay. I was just going to say the other thing that Tetris is also used in a preventative way, and I think the results are a little bit mixed on that at the moment, but when people are in a workplace having to view objectionable material in a repeated way, getting them to have half an hour on Tetris before they go home, the idea that it prevents the consolidation of the memories from that exposure that they've experienced. As I said, there is some evidence that seems to be helpful, but it's not consistently in the same direction. So I'd say the jury is still out on that one, but these are just some of the areas where some of the research is being invested to try to get a better understanding of the mechanisms that lead to PTSD, as well as the mechanisms that might help to promote recovery. Sorry. There are also a range of innovations in treatment. So we're at the process at the moment of putting together the next version of the treatment guidelines, and we're actually going to do this as a living guideline, meaning that as new evidence comes in, we'll be able to continually update, because in some of these areas the level of evidence is so weak that all you need is 2 or 3 good solid studies and everything can shift. So rather than wait for another 5 years, we're saying, no, we need to actually be able to continually update. So these are some of the things that aren't yet what we'd call evidence-based, but are on the way, and they're showing a great deal of promise. So interpersonal therapy, mindfulness-based stress reduction, present-centred therapy, neurofeedback and biofeedback, and transdiagnostic approaches. So transdiagnostic approaches is really looking at, we know that there's a lot of overlap in symptoms between PTSD, depression, anxiety, for instance. So can we get below the level of a disorder and say, what are the common elements that people experience across mental health conditions, and can we target those common elements in a way that you don't have to wait for someone to have a disorder, but you're working at that mechanism that might lead to one disorder or another and trying to get some change happening in a transdiagnostic way without it being specific to one disorder. So a lot of really exciting developments, and as I say, the rate of development in this field is quite rapid, so we really need to be keeping abreast of things in an ongoing way. Sorry? 1 minute, okay. Yeah, you might as well jump in.
This one. Need roaming mics. I can't stand still, sorry. But PTSD is just a small range of the difficulties, and often by the time people admit they've got PTSD, a lot of their resources in their life have been eroded, and so we have to take a much broader approach to rehabilitation, support and re-engagement. These are some of the things that are quite important, certainly access to service dogs and access to other kind of treatments like that has proved to be very helpful in individuals. We're trying to build evaluation frameworks just so that we can build the evidence around that. But support in re-engaging with meaningful activity, regardless of your level of disability and impairment, you're entitled to be a full member of the community, be able to participate in multiple ways, and often that isn't what happens. Often people end up isolating, alone and not connecting, and they lose all of these things that can hold people in recovery, and that's where we get the really tragic outcomes from, colleagues and friends that have injuries. So as a whole community, looking at better ways to encourage re-engagement and participation is the end goal, as well as recovery.
I think that was our last slide. No time for questions. Thank you.